So step 2 is completing the activity test. This part will need you to estimate the number of recognised activities that you do, and it will determine how many hours of subsidised childcare you can receive. I'll pass to Gillian now, and she'll explain the activity test in more detail to help you understand the information you'll need to input into that process.
Thanks, Gabby. So as Gabby just said, the number of hours of subsidised care per fortnight you can receive will be determined by our new activity test. The more hours of activity that you do, the more hours of subsidised care you'll be entitled to receive. Just as is the case now, you will be able to access up to a maximum of 100 hours of subsidised care per fortnight, subject to the number of hours of recognised activity that you do. This table shows you the relationship between the hours of activity and the hours of subsidised care in the new activity test. And as you can see, there will be a closer alignment between the hours of subsidised care and the hours of activity. The first row, the one that isn't numbered, is for those families on incomes of $66,958 per year or less who genuinely can't meet the activity test. These families will be eligible for up to 24 hours per fortnight of childcare subsidy at the highest childcare subsidy percentage of 85%. If you actually earn over this amount but have less than 8 hours of activity per fortnight, you won't be eligible for any childcare subsidy. If you're doing between 8 and 16 hours of activity per fortnight, then you'll be eligible for up to 36 hours of subsidised care per fortnight. That's the first step of the activity test. The second step is for those people who are doing activity of between 16 and 48 hours per fortnight, and that will entitle you to 72 hours of subsidised care per fortnight. And then if you have more than 48 hours of activity in a fortnight, you will be able to claim up to 100 hours of subsidised care. You might have noticed that the hours of subsidy are actually more than the hours of activity. This is because we want you to have flexibility in how you manage your activity and your childcare arrangements. So let's go on and talk in a little bit more detail about the activity test itself. And I just used the word recognised activity when I was talking through the steps. And we've had lots of questions via social media about what's included in the activity test and what is a recognised activity. So I'm going to talk you through those now, and I'm also going to talk to you about the exemptions that we also have. And these are similar to those that are currently in place for the Childcare Benefit Work Training Study test. So on this slide you can see that paid work is of course a recognised activity, and one of the things that we've been asked about is about meal breaks. And if meal breaks, like taking a lunch break or taking an afternoon tea break for example, happen while you're at work and it's all part of being at work, then of course that is absolutely included. So if you're self-employed, then that is a recognised activity. Paid and unpaid leave, which is part of your conditions of employment, are also considered recognised activities. And periods of leave will be recognised at the same level of activity as declared for your paid work, including self-employment. So if you were working full-time before you went on leave, then while you're on leave, you're still considered to be in activity full-time. For unpaid leave, except for unpaid parental leave, this will only be recognised for a maximum of a continuous period of 6 months. For unpaid parental leave, this will be recognised for both self-employed individuals as well as for individuals who work from contract to contract or casually for a regular employer, provided that they intend to return to work with that employer after their period of leave. And there's no time limit on the amount of time you can use unpaid parental leave as a recognised activity. Unpaid work for a family business is also included, and so this is a business that's owned by a member of your family, like your partner or the parent of your partner. It could be a sibling, it could be your child, it could be a partner of your child. If you're receiving New Start allowance, youth allowance, job seekers, special benefit or parenting payment, then these all count as recognised activities as long as you are meeting the compulsory participation or mutual obligation requirement of those payments. For these particular payments, you'll get what we called a minister's rule result of 36 hours of subsidised care per fortnight in recognition of that mutual obligation requirement. So that means you would meet the first step of the activity test. But if you then do more than 16 hours of activity, whether that is more than 16 hours of activity in a fortnight to meet your mutual obligation requirement, or you combine it with another activity, then you could move to one of the other steps of the activity test. The last one on this screen is an approved course of educational study. You need to be enrolled in or actively working towards completing a secondary or tertiary course of study. And this includes practical placement. So if you were studying an education degree, for example, and you did a practicum in a school as part of the course, then that would count. And semester and vacation breaks during the duration of your course are included, but not any vacation that is before the course starts or at the end of the course. So let's keep going and look at some more activities. If you're actively looking for work, then this is also recognised, and this one is recognised also at the first step of the activity test. So this, by actively looking for work, I mean things like engaging in looking for a job, preparing resumes and job applications, contacting potential employers, or preparing for and attending a job interview, for example. The next one is training courses which improve your skills or your employment prospects. And again, you must be enrolled in the training course and actively working towards completing it. And semester breaks and vacation breaks are the same as a course of educational study. So those during the training course are included, but those at the end or before you start are not included. Unpaid voluntary work is a recognised activity. Now, by unpaid voluntary work, I mean things that could improve your work skills or employment prospects. You could be doing some unpaid voluntary work for a charitable, welfare or community organisation, or you could be doing something in a school, a preschool or a centre-based daycare service that directly supports the learning and development of the children. If unpaid voluntary work is the only activity that you do, then you will only be eligible for the first step of the activity test, which is 36 hours of subsidised care per fortnight. If you're receiving the carer's allowance, then this will be recognised as an activity and you will get an automatic result of 72 hours per fortnight. So this is the second step of the activity test. If you actually undertake more than 48 hours of activity per fortnight, so your caring responsibilities plus something else, then you will be eligible for the third step of the activity test, which is 100 hours of subsidised care per fortnight. The last one there is actively setting up a business that has not yet started to operate. So this could include things like getting financial advice, attending or organising meetings and network meetings, those kinds of things, or developing a business plan or a marketing plan. And if you are actively setting up a business, then recognition of this activity is time limited to 6 months in every 12 months. And just in case there's something we haven't thought of on the list that I've just shown you across those two slides, you can have your activity recognised on a case-by-case basis to ensure that you don't miss out on subsidised care when you are genuinely engaged in some kind of activity. So I mentioned earlier that there are also exemptions, and that is exactly the same as is the case now. So I'd like to go through those exemptions with you. So the first exemption is where someone is a disabled person who is unable to engage in recognised activity to any significant degree, or would be unable to adequately care for their child if the child didn't attend childcare. So this could be somebody who is receiving the disability support pension or the veteran's invalidity pension, or it could be someone who has been diagnosed by a medical practitioner or psychologist as being disabled. Excuse me. And in this case, the exemption would be for 100 hours of subsidised care per fortnight, so the third step of the activity test. The next one is for those who might be temporarily living outside of Australia. So this could be someone, as I said, who's living, but it also applies to someone who might be travelling overseas. And in this instance where the claimant, so that is the person who is making the claim for the childcare subsidy, is outside of Australia, they can only continue to receive the childcare subsidy for up to 6 weeks. So if this was you and for some reason you needed to be out of Australia but your children were back here in Australia with your partner or with another carer, you might want that partner or carer to become the CCS claimant, the childcare subsidy claimant, so that you weren't limited by that 6 weeks limit. And the result for this one is also the third step of the activity test, 100 hours per fortnight. If you're in jail or undergoing psychiatric confinement, then that is an exemption. And again, the third step of the activity test, 100 hours per fortnight. If you're receiving the carer payment, then you are also exempt. And the result is the third step of the activity test, 100 hours per fortnight. There's still some more. If you are providing constant care for a child or adult with a severe or intense disability, but you don't qualify for the carer payment because of the income test or the asset test, then you are also exempt and you would be eligible for the third step of the activity test, 100 hours per fortnight. If you or your partner is a grandparent or a great-grandparent and is the principal carer of their grandchildren or great-grandchildren and you're not in receipt of income support, then you would be eligible for an exemption for the third step of the activity test, 100 hours per fortnight. But your childcare subsidy will be determined by your income. In the case of grandparents, and Anne is going to talk to this as well for those grandparents who are on income support, it's very important to note that you need to be caring for your grandchildren or great-grandchildren for 65% of the time and have substantial autonomy over the day-to-day decision-making around that child's welfare and well-being. The next one is for those families where one or both parents don't meet the activity test. There is an exemption for a child who attends an early education program, like preschool or kindergarten, in the year that is 2 years before grade 1 of school. In this case, the child must be attending the preschool program in a centre-based daycare centre. The Minister's rule result is the first step of the activity test, so 36 hours of subsidised care per fortnight. And if you have more than one child in your family, the exemption is only for the child who is attending the preschool program. Again, if we've forgotten something or if there are other circumstances that warrant an exemption, we always have the ability to make a determination on a case-by-case basis. So that's a little bit of a rundown of what's included in the activity test. It's also important for you to know how the activity test works. And Gabby's already said this, but in two-parent families, both parents must meet the activity test or be exempt. And if each parent meets a different step of the activity test, it's the parent on the lower step that will determine the subsidised hours of care. So if one parent does more than 48 hours per fortnight of activity, and that is the third step of the activity test, but the other parent does somewhere between 16 and 48 hours, which is the second step, then that family will be eligible for 72 hours of subsidised care per fortnight. You can, as I said when I was talking about some of those activities, combine hours of more than one recognised activity together to determine your total. So you might be working part-time and studying, or you might be working part-time and doing some volunteer work and also attending a training course. You could add all of those together to get to your total hours per fortnight. You can also include reasonable travel time in the estimation of your hours. So, for example, travel from your childcare centre to your place of work or activity and back again to the childcare centre. If you work casual or irregular hours, you will be able to estimate the highest number of hours you expect to work in any one fortnight over a 3-month period. And this will then be used to work out a consistent fortnightly activity test result, and it's designed to help ensure continuity of care while supporting your workforce participation. Once the new arrangements start from the 2nd of July, if you have estimated your activity over that 3-month period because you are in casual or irregular work, you will need to notify Centrelink of any changes in case that means that you move to another step of the activity test.